My name is Emily Gilbert, and I am the president of the Board of Trustees for your Schaumburg Township District Library. On behalf of the entire library board and the wonderful and dedicated staff, I would like to thank you all for joining us at our One Book, One Community event this year, and for attending today's incredibly special afternoon with author Kate Quinn. Our One Book, One Community is particularly significant to us at Schaumburg Library. We love the idea of uniting everyone in our community through the joy of reading and fostering meaningful dialogue. I'm pleased that this year's selection, The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, allowed us to come together and discuss the timely, important, and universal themes of feminism, friendship, belonging, and identity. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and I love the way the boarders at Briarwood House came together as a community. I hope that our One Book, One Community initiative provided you with a personal opportunity to connect with your friends, family, neighbors, and other book lovers in a unique and meaningful way. Our featured speaker, Ms. Kate Quinn, is from Southern California and a graduate of Boston University with a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice. Her novels often focus on the unexpected and lesser-known roles women have played in history, and her 2017 novel, historical fiction novel, The Alice Network, catapulted her to fame as a New York Times bestselling author. Her latest novel, The Astral Library, will be released later this week, though we very luckily got it early, and it's available for order out in the lobby. Without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Kate Quinn.
Shorty problem. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I will do my best to live up to it. The French mime Marcel Marceau once said, "Never get a mime talking because he'll never shut up." I'm not sure anyone should really be asking a writer to talk either, because there is a reason we use the printed word to communicate and not the spoken, and that reason is because we want to edit everything a few times, run it through some beta readers, parse it past a copy editor before it comes out of our mouths. And since writers mostly work alone all day, our communication skills devolve after a while, until the day we realize that we have not addressed a single word to anyone but the dog in 72 hours, and our vocabulary has been reduced to a series of grunts. It's like reverse evolution, but with a lot more coffee. But you did ask me to speak today anyway, for which I thank you, because, it is honestly a rather rare occasion I get to put on adult clothes instead of the yoga pants and the lucky Old Navy tank top in which I once wrote 6,000 words in a sitting. I became a writer because I grew up with books. My house is full of books. My parents read to me as a child, and since my librarian mother's other degree was in ancient and medieval history, my bedtime stories were about Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon rather than Cinderella, the wives of Henry VIII rather than the 12 dancing princesses, I Claudius instead of the Disney Channel. History fascinated me from a very young age, and that's where I gravitated as soon as I started writing stories of my own, which was at a young age. I wrote my very first short story at age 7 and my first novel at age 10. Now, I do want to be absolutely clear, that first novel was absolutely ghastly. There's 121 pages of double-spaced, pure awful about a 10-year-old girl in medieval Ireland who was just like me, except she had a horse because, I was 10 years old. What did I want? I wanted a horse. I don't remember too much more else about this early piece of juvenilia, except that my version of Ireland had snakes in it because, I was 10 years old. I wasn't too big on historical research. And as bad as that book was, it really kindled something in me. After that, I was never not writing a book. I wrote 2 more by the time I was 13. My high school years were consumed with writing a massive fantasy historical trilogy based on Catherine the Great's Russia, thousands of pages long, which I finished at some point in my senior year. And I learned a few things along the way writing all those books. I learned a few basic rules about how to craft a story, that it needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, and characters that change in the course of traveling from page 1 to the end. I learned that not all the heroines needed to be girls exactly my own age with a heavy dose of wish fulfillment for what I wished was going on in my own life at the time. And I learned that historical stories were really where my heart lay, what I wanted to write. I went clear across the country to Boston University at 18, and since that was the summer that Gladiator had been released in theaters, and yes, I am aware that I am dating myself with this reference, I ended up working on a novel set in Imperial Rome. For the next 6 years, I studied music. I was training to be an opera singer and following my professional musician father's heritage. But I was always in the background following my mother's heritage as well, and writing books. Now, in retrospect, this whole career plan of I'll be an opera singer, and if that doesn't work out, I'm going to be a novelist. I probably should have told my teen self, kid, have a plan C. Business school, maybe, something. I do feel very lucky that at least one of these plans worked out. By the time I was out of graduate school and going to opera auditions, I had at least 6 or 7 more novels under my belt, and I'd even started querying literary agents about them on the side. Now, the way that worked is I would finish a book, I would look up all of the agents in literary marketplace who were currently representing historical fiction. I would send them all query letters, and then they would all write back telling me no. Then I would write another novel, I'd query another batch of literary agents, get another round of no's, and then I'd write another novel, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. I had a lot of rejection letters. But eventually, they did start to get more encouraging, the kind that ladle out a little bit of praise along with the no. And about a year or so after graduate school was done, and this being after about 8 years of querying, I had a rejection that turned into an offer of representation. A literary agent refused the book that I had submitted to her, but she was complimentary enough about my style that I felt emboldened to ask if she wanted to see something else that I'd written. She said yes, and I pulled that novel, Imperial Rome, out from under my bed, the one that I had written some 8 years earlier in my freshman year of college in a brand new city, far from home, and that ended up being published 2 years later as my debut novel, Mistress of Rome. Now, it's been more than a decade since that first novel, and I've ended up covering a lot of eclectic ground. But my work has been primarily historical fiction, which means I spend a lot of my time reading about and thinking about the past. How to portray it, how to research it, how to tell stories about it, and of course, how to completely ruin the viewing experience of anybody unlucky enough to be watching a period movie with me. Seriously, historical novelists are the worst. It is about that. It is worse than trying to watch Star Trek with a physicist. People often ask me, why historical fiction? Because, it's maddeningly slow to produce because of all the research. It is frustratingly difficult to fact check, and it requires serious time commitment on the part of publishers, readers, and authors. All in a world where we are increasingly pressed for time and our attention spans increasingly shortened by social media. This is probably why people keep announcing historical fiction is dead. That announcement seems to come minimum once a year from literati types who are then astounded, when a historical novel emerges from nowhere and rides the bestseller list for the next 6 months. And I can tell you, though, that books revolving around the past and seminal moments of history are not dead, and they never will be. Historical fiction is a lens to examine humanity's current issues by seeing how they were dealt with in the past. Madeline Miller's wonderful Song of Achilles, which is one of those unexpected runaway historical bestsellers, features at its core the romance between two male heroes of ancient Greece. And seeing the problems and prejudices these lovers face invites a lot of thought and comparison about the challenges that the queer community continue to face today. Sometimes historical novels can throw up a comparison in the opposite direction by showing how people of the past might have had privileges not extended to people born much later in the timeline. I wrote 4 books set in 1st century Imperial Rome, which was an era where a woman could initiate a divorce from her husband. That was a right that the English women in my World War I era novel, The Alice Network, did not have a couple thousand years later. The progress of human rights tends to be jagged, not linear. It is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes a step to the side. not a steady march ahead. And historical fiction, more than any other genre, has the power to highlight that. The best authors in the business don't just open a window to the past, they take you on a full senses immersion experience. If I write a dinner party set in the Renaissance, I want you to be able to taste the roast capons and the marzipan torts. If I write about a bombing raid in the Battle of London, I want you to feel the shells dropping all around you. That kind of head-to-toe immersion is only possible through research, and a very specific kind of research. Basic research will give you names, dates, places, events, timelines, and that's where any research for a novel begins, but you can't start writing at that point. That just gives you the outline of the historical world you're looking to cover, and shadowy world building makes for a pretty dissatisfying book. It's the small details of daily life that bring the past to life, and you aren't ready to write until you have those details at your fingertips. I don't just want to know that D-Day happens June 6, 1944. I need to know what people in 1944 wore and what materials those clothes were made out of, and were they fastened with buttons or ties or zippers. I want to know what the dishes on a typical dinner menu would be in 1944, and what a loaf of bread would cost, or a month's rent on a flat in London. I want to know what games children played in 1944, and what men did to relax after work, and what beauty products women used. What holidays people had and how they were celebrated. Those are the kind of details you need to have before you can begin writing, because those are the details that turn the past into something three-dimensional. That's why researching a historical novel is so in-depth and so important. There are more sources available today than ever before. If I need to know what Eleanor Roosevelt's writing style was like, I can pull up digitized copies of every word she wrote for her My Day column as First Lady. If I need to describe a battlefield in Ukraine, I can pull up Google Maps and take full-color, 360-degree look at the site where that battle was fought. Historical authors can now use books, the internet, scholarly essays, maps, digitized newspaper articles, everything else they can get their hands on. Because you never know when a tiny historical fact uncovered on page 899 of your reading will give you the eureka moment that changes everything in your plot. Most of us love the research, and I will admit it sometimes leads us down lunatic paths. My lovely friend Stephanie Dray, who wrote the Nile trilogy about Cleopatra's daughter, will admit that her agent and her husband had to perform an intervention to stop her from trying to ferment shellfish in her backyard in an effort to recreate the imperial purple dye of ancient Rome. The late, great C.W. Gortner put on a dress and a fake baby bump, and he went on a side-saddle horseback ride so he would know exactly how Queen Juana the Mad felt when she galloped cross-country while 5 months pregnant to get away from her husband. And I really hope he took photos of that. As for me, I have been known to ask my trusty part-time research assistant such questions as, what is a lethal dose of mercury inhalation, or what are the early onset symptoms of syphilis, which has sometimes been just a touch awkward considering that my trusty part-time research assistant also goes by the name of Mom. Yeah, the syphilis question in particular, I really should have led with, this is for a book, but... One of the reasons we all go just a little crazy when it comes to the research is because reader expectations for historical fiction are high. So many of our readers are smart and informed, and they care deeply about the historical eras they're reading about. Because history can so often still be a source of pride or shame, strength or trauma to people grappling with a complicated historical legacy from their nations or from their ancestors. Pain resonates through generations, and those readers want and deserve smart, well-informed literature about the past. So, how does a writer go about respectfully and responsibly crafting our individual fiction story around something as hugely important as a world war, or a nation's revolution, or the life of a single, extraordinary, trailblazing person? Any author of histfic is a bit like Dr. Frankenstein building a human being from the ground up. The historical facts are the bones of your story, but you still have to add flesh to those bones. How much leeway you have will depend on how many bones you have to start off with. When I wrote In the Ancient World, there were always much bigger gaps in the historical record because 2,000 years is a long time for sources to go missing, get destroyed, or become corrupted. Writing Lady of the Eternal City about Emperor Hadrian and his wife, there are entire decades of their lives about which we know almost nothing. That's like building a human being when all you've got to start with is a skull, a thigh bone, and maybe a couple of ribs. More documented eras give you more bones. When I wrote the Rose Code about the women of Bletchley Park, there were hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation about Britain's secret intelligence war against the Axis powers. That is like building a human being and all you're missing from the skeleton is few ribs and toe bones. But even if you're working with a complete set of facts, all that gives you is bones. You cannot be sure that surviving sources are accurate or unbiased. In fact, you should count on the fact that historical sources carry some kind of bias and account for it. We talk about the facts, but the facts are still always filtered and recorded by human beings who have a conscious agenda, an unconscious bias, or can simply be fallible. Whatever set of facts or bones history leaves you, you're the one who has to interpret those facts and then layer them with motivation and feeling, putting flesh onto your story like layering muscle over a skeleton. In the end, history only tells us what happened. It rarely tells us why things happened or how people truly felt about them. This is the real magic of telling stories about the past. Above all, the historical fiction brings the human touch to those huge impersonal seeming events of the historical record. It makes us realize that under the history book sweep of vast armies marching, nationwide treaties being signed, world-changing legislation being drafted, there are people like us, people of the past who might live under different laws and wear funny clothes, talk real strange, but they are still driven by the same basic human urges. You know those tabloid pages, stars, they're just like us. That's kind of what historical fiction does, only instead of a picture of Taylor Swift getting her own cup of Starbucks, it's a Bernard Cornwell novel where Alfred the Great turns from a name in a history lesson about the birth of England as a nation and becomes a story about a real human being, a man who dreads failure and prays for success and plays with his kids and gets ulcers from the stress. In my own books, I'm particularly fascinated by women in history. How, when they're frequently marginalized and reduced to the sidelines of large historical events, they still manage to find a way to contribute, to serve, and to shine. How they live their lives, often under extraordinarily difficult circumstances, and still manage to contribute to the world around them. My last novel, The Briar Club, is a microcosm of feminine life in the early 50s, what it was like to live as a woman in America during the heyday of McCarthy. And fundamentally, it's a book about the bonds between women and how those bonds can be tested during a crisis. The Briar Club takes place in an all-female boarding house in early 1950s Washington, D.C. Briarwood House is a little down at the heels, and a number of very different women call it home. These women have nothing in common but an address. Until the day the mysterious widow, Grace March, moves into the top-floor apartment and begins drawing her unlikely collection of neighbors together. Over weekly potluck suppers and cups of Grace's sun tea, the women of Briarwood House come to realize they have a lot more to offer each other than just gripes about who gets the bathroom next. But all these women have secrets to hide, and on Thanksgiving Day in 1954, one of those secrets will come home to rest with spectacular and deadly results. Why the 1950s? I'm often asked that because my previous books revolved in many ways around various world wars. Well, that was partially the reason. I was getting a little bit burned out on war. I wanted to try something else for a change, at least for one book. And I thought about the 1950s because really it's an era that is seemingly placid on the surface but has many undercurrents going on beneath. There is the looming threat of nuclear war and the nuclear generation growing up with the idea that complete obliteration might be just over the horizon. There's the USSR lurking over that horizon like the evil empire in the minds of so many Americans. There's the decline of radio as television begins entering American homes and becomes a huge power in its own right that will change everything from politics to pop culture. Women are hitting the glass ceiling at full force as the get out there and work for the boys on the front line mentality of World War II moves to the marketed 50s image of the housewife in apron and pearls and a smile, always getting dinner on the table to her adoring husband and squeaky clean kids. There's the simmering of racial tensions as the civil rights movement starts to gain momentum under that surface. Washington, D.C. at this point is not the big city capital it is today. It's a sleepy southern town still ruled by segregation and Jim Crow. The Red Scare is stirring up fear against communists. It incited the Lavender Scare is targeting gay men and women. And above all, Senator Joseph McCarthy is waving lists in Washington, D.C., stirring up witch hunts where innocent Americans were forced to answer extremely unconstitutional questions about their political beliefs, take loyalty oaths if they wish to keep their jobs, and inform on their colleagues if they wanted to stay out of jail. The 50s might look placid, but secretly it's a decade that roils. Inspiration behind the Briar Club, well, that came from a variety of sources. First of all, I think of it as my post-pandemic book. It is the book that came about, which I pitched to my agent after over a year in lockdown, when I had not seen my friends or gathered my family around my table in what felt like forever. So what did I do? I'm a writer. I then gathered a bunch of fictional friends and gathered them around a table and fed them. One of my very favorite essays is from the late, great Laurie Colwin, who was a food memoirist and novelist and humor author. And she wrote a fantastic essay called Alone in the Kitchen with an Eggplant. And that describes very vividly and movingly what it was like to be a broke 20-something in New York City, living in an apartment the size of a placemat, yet still managing to get her friends over and feed them in tiny dinner parties, even though her kitchenette consisted of a hot plate balanced on top of a mini fridge and no sink, so the spaghetti had to be drained in the bathtub. And I thought, I like that. I can do something with that. I think I can. What about a women's boarding house? And they get together and they feed each other once a week and have potluck and I can have recipes. And then I watched on Netflix a Japanese show called Midnight Diner, which gave me even more of an idea about a boarding house, because that features a diner where the mysterious owner, each episode deals with a different client, a different person, a different set of problems for him to help them solve, and a different dish. So I knew, okay, we'll go between the various women at the boarding house. The mysterious woman who's just come to town will help solve each of their problems, depending on what they need. Everyone will have a theme recipe. I love the idea of this, except I kept thinking, this does not really sound like a Kate Quinn book. Like nobody is getting arrested or stabbed or shot or bombed. It's like, where's the hook? So that came to me at a conversation with my husband, whose undergrad studies were done in Soviet and post-Soviet bloc relations from World War II era to modern day. And he threw a casual remark out one day as I was watching the TV show The Americans about Soviet spies undercover in the U.S. And that casual remark, trying to parse this without spoilers for those who haven't finished the Briar Club, rewired the entire ending of this book in my head and made me realize, okay, I have a hook. And it will be a Kate Quinn book after all. The women are all fictionalized as a little bit archetypal. They're fictional, but their experiences are all based on real experiences lived by real women during this time period. I wanted to examine a wide array of the female experience in the 50s. So the women in this book are as different as possible when it comes to education, social class, background, experience, religion, and age. You'll meet Nora, a young Irish-American girl from a big police family who's managed, despite no college education, to get herself a terrific job at the National Archives. Through her, I got to examine law and order in America in the 50s and how organized crime filled the gaps where the law fell short, and how police could corrupt the law as well as uphold it. Her story is where I took a look at our legacy and our founding, and why the historical documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, stored at the National Archive where Nora works, remain relevant. After Nora, you'll meet Reka, a German-Hungarian refugee in her 70s who fled Hitler's Berlin and came to America in the 1930s. Through her, I examine World War II's long-running hangover into the next decade, the immigrant experience, and what the American dream really looks like for the people who are struggling to live it. It's also because I'm fascinated by the wartime swirl around great works of art, where I dig into the Nazi theft of artwork from Jewish families and what happened to that art during and after the war. After Reka comes Fliss, a young British woman married to an American doctor currently serving overseas in the Korean War, a war very few Americans at the time cared much about unless they had someone directly involved. Fliss was also the perfect set of eyes to examine the complicated business of being a single mother as she struggles to raise her toddler alone and deals with everything from postpartum depression to the endless maternal guilt of being never quite good enough in an era where the smiling, apron-wearing wife and mother was dominating every TV show, put on a pedestal yet harshly judged if she failed to live up to the expectations of perfection. After Fliss comes Bee, who serves as my exploration of women in the glass ceiling in male-dominated fields. Bee is an ex-star shortstop from World War II women's baseball leagues. That's a league of their own for all of us who loved the movie or the TV show. But neither the movie nor the show delves into what happened to those women players after the war. Bee is now working as a PE teacher and realizing she's been edged out of a job she loves because no one wants to see women in sports at that level now that there isn't a war on and there's a new ultra-feminine image to live up to. After Bee, there's Claire, whose family was torn apart in the Great Depression and whose work on Capitol Hill in the office of Senator Margaret Chase Smith gave me a chance to explore that extraordinary woman who gave the Declaration of Conscience, a speech facing down Joe McCarthy and telling him to his face in front of the entire Senate that his witch hunts were unconstitutional and un-American. Claire's friendship with another senator's daughter-in-law also gave me the chance to explore domestic violence and the financial powerlessness of women in these outwardly ideal 50s marriages who were inwardly hamstrung by having no legal control over their money or their children. This might seem like a worryingly large cast of characters, and I did wrestle with the writing of this book of how to balance them all. I didn't want to cut the cast down. This felt like a book that needed a wide range of eyes to express the full picture of the world I wanted to show. And yet I didn't want to have readers confused either. So I adopted a format I had seen done by the late Maeve Binchy. Any fans of hers here? Yep, see, it's my hands. I thought so. She does large ensemble novels like this. My favorite is Evening Class, where she'll dip into her viewpoints sequentially rather than mixing them up. And that's what I do in the Briar Club. You'll meet Nora, and you'll get a full arc from her as you dip into her life. Then you'll meet Reka and get the same for her as Nora retreats to the background. And then Nora and Reka both retreat to the background as background characters when Fliss steps up into the spotlight for her own arc, and so on. Not only did that format let me expand my cast without making the book hopelessly confusing, but it lets the reader get curious as they see each of these women walking in and out of each other's stories. Just the way in real life, people walk all in and out of our lives, living their own stories, and we never really know what's going on inside those lives until we get a peek behind the curtain. All these women and more are pulled together by Grace, the enigmatic widow whose arrival at Briarwood House begins to make friends of them all, and who has a gift for being there for her housemates whenever they need a helping hand, a listening ear, a bit of pithy advice, or just a glass of heavily spiked sun tea. But nobody knows anything about Grace, as warm and giving as she is, so the last secrets to be revealed in this novel are Grace's, leading to that fatal Thanksgiving day where not one but two bodies hit the floor and all the secrets come out. And there is a special omniscient witness hanging over everyone on that fateful Thanksgiving day, observing all the secrets and all the behind-the-scenes machinations as the women begin to maneuver around the oblivious police. And that is Briarwood House itself. Yep, this book does have a slight element of the fantastical, and that is the fact that the house itself in the Briar Club is the last viewpoint in the book. It's just a bit sentient, and it frequently comments on the doings inside its own walls. It actively roots for some of its boarding house tenants, actively roots against others. You can tell the house likes you if you always seem to get the waft of a cool breeze on a hot day, and your key never sticks in the door. If the house doesn't like you, you might find the hallway carpet constantly rucking up under your shoe to trip you, and your glass of water constantly tipping over into your lap. I've been asked, why bring a whimsical element like that to a historical novel? And my answer is twofold. First of all, this novel is fundamentally about found family, about a group of strangers who become friends, then more than friends, and then ultimately a kind of family who may not share blood but still have each other's backs through thick and thin. It's one of my very favorite themes in fiction, and it's one that I return to over and over in my books. And if a central question of the Briar Club is what makes a group of people into a family, then a related question is, what makes a house a home? From the start, I wanted Briarwood House to be a kind of character in its own right. It turns from a place which is not a particularly nice place to live into a place where people love living. And so over several drafts, the house quite literally came to life for me, and I began playing with the idea, if these walls could talk. The walls of Briarwood House don't talk, but they definitely listen. And my second motive for including a sentient house as a character in this novel was to extend a cautious feeler out to my readers. I wanted to let them to know if they were willing to follow me, if I threw them a little thread of something magical and not just historical. I was hoping to reel them in on that thread with a question. If you like the sentient house, then what do you feel about a sentient library? And that leads us to something really fun, just to wrap things up here. I am always asked, what's your next book? And today I'm here to tell you a little something about it. It's titled The Astral Library. It is my first foray into magical realism. And although there are plenty of historical elements, and it centers around a single question, have you ever wanted to live inside a book? The Astral Library is a liminal space that can open from any library in the world, from the little free library on your street corner to the most sweeping, hundreds-year-old castle library in Europe, to the most roach-infested, underfunded branch in the worst part of town that is somehow hanging on for its patrons. The Astral Library can open a door from any and all of these if it senses a bookworm who is lost, desperate, and in need of sanctuary. A door opens for Alex, a 20-something ex-foster kid eking out a living in modern-day Boston, barely making ends meet through a patchwork of badly paid jobs and finding escape in her favorite fantasy novels. Finding that she has the chance to literally escape into one of her favorite book worlds and make a new life there seems too good to be true. And maybe it is, because before Alex can escape into the pages of her new life, a shadowy enemy begins to attack the library and everyone it has helped protect. Alex will have to fight not only for the library, but for her own future, and learn along the way just what kind of heroine she can be. The Astral Library is a departure for me. It might seem very different from the Briar Club and all my previous novels, and it is. It's my love letter to libraries, librarians, and the world of readers. And it's my battle cry to protect libraries and stories as the sanctuary spaces that they are. And even though it doesn't officially hit shelves and release until this Tuesday, February 17th, we got special permission from my publisher to sell it a couple of days early, and you will find them for sale after the event out there. So that's the answer to the perennial question, what is my next book? And maybe the Astral Library isn't really so different from my historical fiction. History is the story of the past, and stories, whatever they are about, whatever genre or shelf in the library they inhabit, ultimately mean humanity. Stories teach us empathy, how to see the world from eyes that are not our own. Stories teach imagination, how to see the world in so many more colors than just the ones painted by your own eyes. And imagination is magic. It's time travel, plain and simple. Every book is its own time machine, a TARDIS, for you Doctor Who fans, that can take you anywhere, and you don't even need a Time Lord to do it. All you need is a library card. And Doctor Who might not be our guide to visiting times long gone and worlds far distant, but he does say it best for those of us who love stories and want to spend our lives writing them, reading them, living inside them. We're all stories in the end. Just make it a good one, eh? Thank you.
All right, so we have some questions, and this will be yours. That was so lovely, thank you. So we have some questions from the audience, and they're in my pocket. Let me grab them. So a couple of them had a lot to do with a lot of your research. So this one says, this is from Denise. It says, with all of the colorful characters in your books, is there a specific one whom you've connected to the most, or any of your characters mirror any of your personality traits?
I think probably all of my characters have a little something of me in them. I think it's hard enough for that not to happen. But they do feel pretty much like their own people who just keep on living in my head after the book is done. It is true that some come to life more vividly than others, or at least more quickly. Some characters hold themselves close, and I need to get to know them and kind of go digging before they'll start talking to me in the way that I need them to. And sometimes characters will sort of burst out of the barn door in a wonderfully exciting way. One member who did that very much was Nina, who was the Night Witch pilot from The Huntress. writing her story was a little bit less like writing, like I was writing down her story, than I was running to keep up with her as she was sprinting ahead, living her life, and shouting over her shoulder at me to keep up.
I was gonna say, do you have any books from, like you said, that was from your Huntress series? Do you have other book or other characters that from any of your series that have really stuck out to you?
In a different way, Eve from the Alice Network always has, and she has been less forthcoming with me, and I think that's because she is a spy, and like any good spy, she plays her cards close to the vest. So I have people ask me all the time, like, because she was very vivid to me, and she did tell me a part of her story, but people ask me all the time, well, what did she do during World War II? Your book only covers her World War I years as a spy. And all I can say is, I know she did something. But she hasn't told me what yet. And so people often ask too as well, would you write a sequel? And it's like, well, maybe if Eve decides to unlock the dossier, I would.
Sure. And then, yeah, so we have another question that says, feminist scholar Laurel Thatcher Ulrich famously said that well-behaved women seldom make history, pointing out the gaps in historical records where normal, everyday women experiences are often left out that you mentioned earlier. In what ways would you say this quote connects to the Briar Club, and what are your favorite ordinary women that you have researched?
Well, it is one of those things where it's not that these women's stories don't exist, it's just that they aren't central in the spotlight of history. So you just have to go digging around the edges of that spotlight to find out what women were up to, and that's always what I want to know. I want to know, in any historical period, what were the women doing? That's my first question I ask myself, and they're almost always doing something more interesting than is front and center in the history books. Some of the ordinary women I've really found and venerated is quite often like, I remember reading, it was a book I found the original Alice Network idea in, which is called Women Heroes of World War I. And I realized my conception of like women contributing to World War I was Red Cross nurse. And that was where my imagination stopped. And here I was suddenly reading about women who were ambulance drivers, women who were soldiers, women who were spies, women who were guides for downed pilots and helped sneak them back to their own countries, women who were war correspondents, and women who were in the medical field too. But there were so many more roles than I imagined. And these were not, for the most part, famous women. They were just women who did their part. Well, and I did, when I researched the Rose Code, that's the women of Bletchley Park, I knew quite a bit already about the male code breakers. There's some really titanic names there, like Alan Turing. But I was startled to learn that at its heyday, Bletchley Park employed something over 9,000 code breakers, and over 6,000 of those were women. So what were the women up to? The women were contributing, were making up more than 2/3 of the force, and it was many women who were recruited not because they had superhuman abilities or superwoman levels of skill in spycraft or code breaking. They were simply ordinary women who wanted to do their part, were recruited, and who were thrown in the deep end with, were breaking codes, learn how to do it. And they'd said, okay, and they learned how to do it. And because of that, the war was shortened and probably millions of lives were saved. So these are often the ordinary women that I am very inspired by. And it's why I like to fictionalize women whose names may not actually come from history, but whose work does. And that's where I was working with the women of the Briar Club, where I was inspired by real women who did work at the National Archives and believed passionately in the importance of saving our foundation documents. Women who did, break the glass ceiling as the first women professional baseball players. Women who did, work to another thread in that book. Women who were part of the drive to create the female birth control pill so that women could control the size of their families at long last. These are all real women's work that was done, and I had so much fun pulling that out and then seeing which of my heroines could do what.
Sure, thank you for that. And so it says as well, is this still on? There we go. Oh, sorry. This one says, when I describe your books to those who have not read you before, I often call it historical fiction with a twist. How do you balance your novels with a healthy dose of mystery genre hallmarks while also staying true to the historical fiction genre?
I don't think I'm particularly a natural at crafting mysteries. It's always something I struggle with, but the thing is that a story has to have a hook. And when you have history, I think sometimes the temptation as you first start writing historical fiction is to say, well, you don't need to worry about how the story is put together because history just tells you what happened. But that can result in the kind of historical novel that just reads like, well, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and now we're done. And that can be unsatisfying because the first job of a storyteller is still to entertain. And the fact is that life often does not, naturally, tidily arrange itself into a tidy 3-act structure. So you have to somehow make history fit inside a storytelling structure where there are questions posed, there are questions that are eventually answered, that there is excitement, that there are stakes. And so adding a little bit of a mystery element to that, or at least a question that needs to be answered, is really the way to help add a hook to a story. I remember that was quite clear, especially when I remember writing the Rose Code. If I had just told the story of the Bletchley Park Codebreakers, the book would have ended with, okay, the war is over, Bletchley Park is shutting down, thank you very much for your service, ladies, please go home and never talk about this again in your whole life. That would be the end of it, and it's not very satisfying. So I took a thread that I read about the fact that we know there was at least one Soviet mole inside Bletchley Park and decided I can spin that into a little bit of a mystery that pulls a thread all the way through the war years and comes to fruition after the war, when technically Bletchley Park is closed and the codebreakers are no longer active. And I can make something out of that to create an ending that is a little more exciting than just, thank you for your service, please go home. And so that's how I try to balance it.
And then something else, just to get to know you a little bit better, is what was one of the first things that you ever tried to publish? And then what was the first thing that actually got published? Do you remember?
I remember trying to publish. I do have my very first rejection letter still. It was, I think I must have been about maybe like 8 years old, and I submitted a poem to like a kids magazine. It was like Cricket magazine. Is that ringing a bell? Yeah, it was Cricket magazine. They sent me a form letter. Thank you very much for your blank, insert, like poem, please keep writing, and we're not including it in the magazine. Thank you so much. So, that was my first thing. I think I tried to get published, and I do still have my first rejection letter.
That's so fun.
So, the first thing that was published, I don't know, I did the occasional story contest in school now and then, and that was fun, but that was fine. I don't really remember the specifics of those, but really the first thing that I published was, that was my debut novel. But, that was probably my 11th or 12th book. I have a lot of books that are under the bed that'll probably never come out, and that is fine. They do not deserve to be seen. That was me teaching myself how to write. I'm pretty much self-taught, and therefore I had to figure out how the wheel worked myself. So that took a lot of books to work through, and those are never coming out, but it wasn't wasted effort. It was learned experience, and it was me figuring out, again, reinventing the wheel, but learning at least how the wheel goes around. And plus you can, it doesn't count as plagiarizing if you plagiarize from yourself. So I have sometimes had things where I've borrowed from early works that I had. The Huntress was one of those where I had an early attempt at writing just a pure mystery novel, and that was what told me I do not have a gift for mystery novels. But I did have a very cool character in there of a teenage girl in Boston who wants to be a photographer. And I loved the character, and I was like, she deserves a better book than this. And eventually I came along to The Huntress, which needed an American girl as a heroine, and I thought, I'm going to go back to that other book, I'm going to pull that character out, and I'm just going to put her into the new book, the new setting. And she took off, and that was great because I already knew her. I knew what her voice was. I knew what her gifts were, and that was a lot less work I had to do. And it still doesn't count as plagiarizing because it was only from me.
Yes, exactly. And we have several questions in our pile in front of us, all about the recipes that you have in your book. A lot of them too were like, how did you come up with the idea to add them? Were any of them your own? How did you come across them? Like, just kind of walk us through a lot of that.
I knew I wanted recipes because, I'm a foodie. I think they're fun to have in books. And I thought, too, it would add something to show what does each character cook when it's their turn. What do they bring to the table that comes from their family, their background, their cultural history. Everybody has, because it's a melting pot of ladies under this roof, and they all have something different. And so that would say it's something in itself about America and what are people eating. And, it says something about who the people are because what you feed to someone to nourish them says something about you. We all have a dish that we cook. Like if we want to tell someone that we care, what is that dish for each of these women? And so therefore the dishes all come from a whole bunch of different culinary backgrounds, since you have women who come from an Irish background, from a German and Hungarian background, from a Swedish background. There's all kinds of different ones. So everyone has something different. And it was part of that melting pot, which America very much is. As far as where I got them, a few of the recipes come from outside sources. The two Ukrainian recipes came from a Ukrainian food blogger who gave me permission to use them because I wanted those recipes, since they came from the actual Ukrainian culture, to be as close to that culture as possible and not the Americanized version that happens after a couple of generations. So those come from the Ukrainian tradition, and that's marked in the back where you can look up the rest of her work if you want to look at that. And then there is the rest of them, with almost no exceptions, came from my husband, because I happen to be married to a very good cook, and we've had a tradition ever since college years where he cooks dinner for us at the end of the evening, and my job is I read aloud. I'm the audiobook, and he doesn't have a lot of time to read fiction, but he'll get his fiction through me as I read aloud from a book, usually one that I've already read that I know he'll enjoy. So I read aloud, he cooks. And as soon as I thought I wanted recipes in this book, I asked him, do you want to do the recipes? And you could actually do them for the book? And he's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you all the recipes have been extensively field tested at my house, and they're all tasty. And the only other one that I'll mention is that there is one recipe that is a vintage 50s recipe that I got from like a 50s cookbook, and that is the thing known as the candle salad. I see a number of you already know what the candle salad looks like. If you do not, I know it's often considered rude to get out your phone during a book event, but if you want to get your phone out and do a Google image search for candle salad, I encourage you to do that if you want a very big laugh. And also because I kind of figure I did a lot of reading on 50s cuisine, which is a very strange time in a lot of ways. This urge to suspend things in Jell-O that should never have been in contact with Jell-O, I do not get it. And the candle salad was one of those recipes I read, and I just thought, if I had to read this, and I now have this image burned into my brain that I will never be able to get out, you get to have it too.
That was great. Appreciate that a lot. So we're going to kind of hop into a little bit more of like a personal question about you. This is from Stacy from Hoffman Estates. She said on Facebook you shared that you just added a new tattoo to your back. Your stars. And it says, how did you get the idea to get this book tattoo, and why do you have the difference between the 4 and 5 stars?
Oh, yeah. Well, this actually, I've always wanted to have a tattoo that would sort of commemorate my books and as I continue to write them and publish them. I just never knew what I wanted. And, you got to be sure if you're putting it on your back for all time, or on your skin for all time. So I finally had the idea just before the Briar Club came out, about a little trail of stars. It starts at the nape of my neck, and it just trails down my spine. And I have a mix of 4 and 5 pointed stars. There were, at the time of it, that I had it all done, since I had it all done at once, I did 11 5-pointed stars that symbolize all of the solo novels that I have done, and published. And then there are 6 4-pointed stars for the collaborative novels, or for the solo novellas that I published, smaller works. And that is because I've done a number of collaborative novels, and I also did an Amazon original that was like a novella length that was shorter. And so that's the 4-pointed stars. So I think I was about a month out from the publication of the Astral Library, and I thought, I really need to get that updated before I'm on the road, and then I can't have somebody, be able to sponge it off for me while it's healing. So I need to get it healed before it's all done. So I went in and I had them add another 5-pointed star for the Astral Library to the trail at the bottom. And fortunately, given my publication schedule, I have a lot of back left.
And speaking of, do you think you can give us maybe a little bit of an insight, because I know the Astral Library is coming out on Tuesday, and that we have copies here as well for patrons. But do you have any idea what your next book's going to be, or anything work in progress, or any ideas that you're trying to throw at a wall?
Oh, yeah. I actually have already just finished drafting the book that is going to come after the Astral Library. I really wanted to get it done before I hit the road, so I have some time away from it. And then when I come back from all of this book tour stuff, I'll be ready to dive in and start editing it. But I did finish it up about a week, maybe week and a half ago, something like that. And right now it has the working title, The Woman on the Mountain. It is back to a more straightforward historical fiction. And it is the story of a trio of friends who are variously involved in a two-timeline story before and after World War I. One is a surgeon who is haunted by his time in the trenches as a combat surgeon. One is a mountaineer, one of the early mountaineers, who is obsessed with the British drive toward summiting Mount Everest, which has never been climbed at this point in history. And one is a Scotswoman, a Viscount's daughter, who ends up involved with the suffragette movement before the war and the drive for women to achieve the vote, and who ends up part of the all-female Amazon bodyguard that trained in jiu-jitsu to fight against the police and against the mobs that were trying to attack their speakers and drag them to jail. And these three friends all pull together in a story that stretches before and after World War I. I love it so much. And my head is so deeply in that story, I literally had to drag myself out to be like, right, people actually need to hear about the Astral Library now. What do I remember about that? Which is always the problem with writers, is that by the time we get around, a book comes out, we're already on to the next one. So we kind of get out here, we're like, can I just tell you about the book that you're not going to be able to read for 18 months? Because I'm really much more head down in that one right now. You sure you want to hear about this one that's just coming out? Because I'm way done with that one.
I will say, though, that your book looks lovely. The cover is beautiful. The sides with that print looks amazing as well.
Oh, it's so gorgeous. The special edition. There's a stamp in there that's an actual library card. It looks so beautiful, and it's got these dragon scale sprayed edges. I mean, I just love these fancy special editions that they started with romantasy and then with romance, and now they're making their way more to historical fiction, and I'm thrilled because I love a pretty book.
And if you haven't checked it out, Read Between the Lines has a booth outside, and you can definitely take a look at it as well. So our last question for you for the day is, if readers could only focus on one idea from your book, let's make it any of your books, what would you want that to be?
I think overall I'd like them to walk away with a greater sense of awe and understanding of the things that women in the past have achieved. And to know that, to be so impressed by the women who have come before us, whether they were famous or whether they're the women, like you say, who are ordinary women involved in extraordinary things, and to know that we stand on their shoulders and that they have brought things so far and that we still have further to go, but we would have even further to go if not for them. So I hope you will be inspired and awestruck by these women of the past, the way that I am when I research them.
All right. So, yes, I was going to say one last thing. Thank you, guys, right? I was going to say she has been lovely. So, we have an innovation hub at the Schaumburg Township District Library. If you have not checked it out, it is an awesome place to be. And our manager there decided that he wanted to recreate Kate Quinn's book made out of wood. And so he put this on our etcher. And so it has the One Book, One Community on the back with our date, and it says that this was curated from a reference shelf before. So it actually comes from the library, it's been wood carved and all that, and that is actually yours to keep. Yes, of course. So yeah, that concludes our author talk. Thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to escort Kate out to the book signing so everyone can get their books signed and everything. Staff will direct you along the way. So thank you guys again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.